Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview the most thought-provoking, smartest people on the planet. Today, we have Dr. Stephanie Woerner, who has written a very, very fascinating book that we're talking about today, which is The Future of Ready. Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Mark.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So, Stephanie, give us a little bit about your personal background.
Sure. I went to Rice University undergraduate in Houston, Texas, and majored in biology. Worked as in a startup company, and one of my goals after that was to never do inventory again, which I've actually managed to accomplish. Got an MBA at University of Texas at Austin, and then went to Stanford and did a PhD in organizational behavior. And then after that, I worked for a couple of years at Harvard Business School writing cases and teaching notes, and then came to MIT in 2000. And in 2000, I started doing the research that I do on technology. And I joined MIT Center for Information Systems Research in 2007. And now I am the director of the Research Center and a principal research scientist.
So why did you write this book?
We wrote this book. Well, first, I think we should go back to why did we do this research? My colleague Peter Weil and I started some research in 2012 on what was the effect of digital disruption on large companies. And what came out of that was a book called What's Your Digital Business Model? And as we started talking to sponsors and other large companies about the digital business model research, we started getting questions about, okay, this is really interesting. How do we get there? What do we have to do to transform ourselves and achieve that business model? And so we started doing the research on digital transformation, and it was just fascinating to hear how companies were really, how they were working to transform themselves, what they were trying to accomplish. And we eventually wrote the book because it was a chance to really consolidate, integrate, and create, a one-stop shop for all of the research that we have done on digital transformation.
What is your definition of digitalization?
So when we talk about digital transformation, I want to argue that a digital business transformation is not one thing. I think it's two things. One is it is digitization. And digitization is the instilling a discipline around your back office processes. But to do a digital business transformation, you can't just digitize, but you also have to use digital or digitalize also, where you are using digital technologies to create new solutions for your customers, new ways to engage with your customers, and you're empowering your people to experiment. So this idea of digitalization, and digital business transformation is really two separate things that are kind of under the umbrella of digital transformation, innovating on one hand and taking out costs on the other. And that's why it's so hard for almost any company to do, because you're being asked to be ambidextrous. And so that's how I think about digitalization is you digitize your back office, you use digital technologies to engage customers.
What does a successful digital transformation even look like?
Well, we've come up with 4 pathways to transform yourself. And so a successful transformation is one where a company gets to a state that we call future ready. And a future ready company is one that is they're ambidextrous. They're doing these two things at the same time. They're both innovating and taking out costs. They have a great customer experience. And then, and this is some research that we're doing now. They're modular and agile. So these companies are thinking about their processes and how do they make components that can plug and play either internally or externally. These companies are also partnering a lot because it's rare for a company to actually have everything that they need to succeed. And then finally, data is a strategic asset. So a successful transformation is that kind of company, one that is, a profitable growth is one way to look at it. Great customer experience, really relying on data and using evidence.
We talked before the show started. Did you ever envision the world would look like this? Let's say using the benchmark of like the mid 90s to where we are now 30 years later. Hard to believe it's even been 30 years.
It is. I knew when I saw Netscape Mosaic that was going to change things. And then, but I didn't know to what extent. And then when Google came about with its search, and all of a sudden I did not have to remember my Boolean, all of my Boolean operators. That was exciting. But so I knew it was going to be big. I did not realize that every company would be a digital company, that you can't run a business without digital. I did not know to what extent that would be the case. I mean, one way to think about it, about how much we've changed, is when I came to MIT in 2000, I was a project manager and a researcher on a National Science Foundation project. And the grant was for 5 years, and we were to study how will the internet affect large companies? I mean, think how far we've come in 20 years, 23 years from when we started doing that study, that was that companies were going to change the way that they operated internally, that changed the way that they thought about their customers. It was going to change how the kinds of solutions that they were offering their customers. Companies were going to be able to focus more on outputs rather than products. It's fascinating how this has all changed. And while I knew it would be big, did I know how big? No, I did not. I just, had an idea, but if I had known, I would have made a lot of money, probably.
Yeah, we all would have made a lot of money. You and I were talking before that, and I was saying, back in 1999, when the market crashed, and you could buy Amazon for $6 a share, and you could have bought Apple for next to nothing. A bunch of companies. If you just put $1,000 on each of them, you wouldn't have to work. Just a few thousand bucks. Clearly not smart enough at that time. It seems to me there isn't much more that can be offered digitally that hasn't been explored, except for faster speeds. But few new revolutionary ideas. Have we maxed out on what we can do digitally, or are we like in the first inning of a 9-inning game, or the 5th inning? How big do you think this is? How much change are we going to see in the next 10 years?
So Peter and I are doing some research now on this idea that companies are going to have to really identify not just some of these small internal customer journeys, but that companies are going to have to operate in domains rather than industries. And when I talk about domains, I'm talking about fulfilling an end-to-end need and assembling from many different companies in many different industries all the pieces needed to fulfill that need. And I think that we see a couple of companies, we see some companies that are doing that now, but I think there's going to be pressure on a lot of more companies to start thinking about what is a great customer experience and think way more broadly. And I think that digital enables that, in part because of APIs and other ways of connecting and partnering that we did not have before. So I think there's more to be done. Are we in the first inning? We're probably more than the first inning, but I think we're not in the ninth inning. I think there's a lot more to be done. I think that it's going to be this re-envisioning of how you serve the customer, and this need to really assemble a list of partners to create a solution. The other thing is, I think that we could start to see some really different kinds of organizational structures. Now, are they, I don't think that the standard, hierarchical company is going to go away anytime soon. I mean, inertia just keeps a lot of things around. I mean, you could still go to Yahoo and AOL. So, companies don't just disappear, typically. But so I would say somewhere in the middle. And then we haven't even talked about what are technologies like, especially generative artificial intelligence, going to do. That's one where, again, I think it's going to be big. Do I know where it's going? I have some inklings, but could I even predict how big it's going to be? I would probably make an error if I did.
Yeah, I think so as well. Can any business benefit by improved use of digital technology, or is there a slight improvements in some industries and incredible opportunities in others? And when does it make sense to make that kind of investment, and what kind of return should a company be looking for? So I felt those three questions all kind of fit together.
So I think that any company that is of any size, and you have to know, I'm at the Center for Information Systems Research in the MIT Sloan School of Management, and we focus on very large companies. So I don't have as much research and knowledge about, say, very small companies. But for any company of any size, you are going to have to become, you're going to have to use digital technologies. I think your customers are going to demand it. Customer expectations are rising in terms of how easy it is to do business with your company, and those are going to demand those digital technologies. I think you're going to see in different industries, different focuses. So, for instance, large companies like oil and gas and big chemical production, they're probably going to focus much more on digitizing their back end and really looking for efficiencies, and then trying to figure out how they're going to create a better customer experience. But how important it will be that I think remains to be seen. However, even in industries like construction, digital has made a huge difference in the customer experience and in what you could do. I mean, if you look at a company like Cemex, when Cemex's current CEO, Fernando Gonzalez, came in, he looked at the opportunity for creating a great customer experience. And then he had to identify who was the customer. And think about this. This is a cement company. They're sending cement trucks out. Who would think that there's an opportunity for a great customer experience there? And so they did a lot of work and finally identified the job site manager as the customer. And they built a digital platform so that the job site manager never had to leave the job site. They could order online. They could see when deliveries were going to come. And then Cemex went and integrated that into their back end. And when you do that, now you start to have data, you have end-to-end data. You can start to use artificial intelligence. You can start to do predictive scheduling, and you start to think about what are the different ways of using digital. So I think for companies that we would not think of normally as being, where is digital going to work? I think it's short-sighted to think that you shouldn't be thinking about a digital transformation. And so in terms of investment, One of the questions that we ask in the book and we ask in workshops that we do is, what percentage of your revenues are under threat in the next 5 years? And so companies that have a high level of threat, say 70% of their revenues are under threat in the next 5 years, they really have to be, charging forward and moving forward. I would say that companies that say that they have 20% of their revenues are under threat, they have much more time. They can put steps into place. And so I think that every company is going to be a digital company. It's going to be the speed at what you're going to come up with, and then it's going to be the amount that you invest at any one time. Returns take a while. Right now, companies that are future ready are seeing returns of about 7 percentage points above industry average in revenue growth and in net margin. That is our 2022 data that we just collected in October. I think as more companies are becoming more future ready, those returns will shrink, but I think that there will always be returns above industry average for companies that are doing investments and investing in a careful, coordinated kind of fashion.
7% is huge when you're talking to about multi-billion-dollar companies.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's almost an instant payback just from that increase.
Right. Now, it does take a little bit of time. I think we would say I think the quickest I've seen is about 3 years in terms of a transformation. I think KPN in the Netherlands did a pretty quick one. I think the longer ones, DBS Bank and Schneider Electric, were about 10 years for the bulk of their transformations. So I think that when you're talking about transformations, you are looking at a return over, say, 3 to 5 years typically.
So I'm wondering this, what's the process any company should go through to plan their digital strategy and elevate these ideas?
I'm going to argue the most important thing to start with is to develop a common language. And I think that this is going to have to be a language that is throughout the entire company, top to bottom. And so some of the more successful transformations that we've seen have really started by getting the transformation leader, top management team together to, hammer out what is it that the company is trying to do? What is their definition of becoming future ready? And then what's the pathway that they think they want to be on, and to make sure that you have got everybody using the same kind of language. And so, one of the jokes that we'll make is, what is a platform? You could have a two-sided, a multi-sided platform with network externalities that you could put into place. You could have an internal platform that is going to be, where you put like processes together and then you reuse that platform over and over again. There are many different definitions. You want to make sure that you're operating with the same kind of common language, the same kind of definition. And so I think it starts there. I think picking a pathway is really important because you want to be able to tell your people and coach them along and let them know what to expect. Where is it going to be difficult? When are we going to have some of the big challenges? What are some of the big challenges? And then from there, I think the next thing is to deal with one of the big explosions that we talk about, which is, have you allocated decision rights correctly? Do you have the right people leading the transformation? Who's going to be in charge of leading what the transformation is about? And then who's going to be in charge of how it's done? And then also, what is going to be global and what is going to be local? So I think that that's how I would start. Common language, pick a pathway or pathways, and then make sure you allocate those decision rights correctly.
Sears had 100-year head start on Walmart and Amazon, plus one of the most revered brands on the planet. Why do you think they and others like them botched their digital transformation?
I think they didn't cannibalize themselves. I think that they, now I haven't studied Sears in any great detail, but, they were used to sending out catalogs. I mean, I remember giant catalogs coming to the house and, looking through it and thinking about what they had. And I think they poo-pooed that consumers were going to find dealing online with less friction. I think they completely underestimated the desire for customers to go and interact that way. And I don't think that they took a good look at what it was like to shop in their stores or what it was like to have to place an order. And so, they could have had distribution centers. I mean, think about what Amazon did. They built out the network, and then they didn't build the distribution centers until way later. So I think Sears had an opportunity, and I don't think that it's a crisis of imagination, I think. And there were no experiments that they did.
I think you're right. I mean, first of all, I think that people who rise up in organizations like Sears are risk adverse, and the boards are made up of finance people who, with the idea of spending it, and they're not technology savvy to begin with. They're asking their kids, "How do you work this thing again?"
Still see that.
And they're not intellectually interested in new ideas. They typically are putting these kinds of people in place back then. I think they're smarter now, these companies, and maybe not that much smarter, but a little bit more savvy. But if you look at all these companies that had enormous leads, like Smith Corona, you couldn't have had a bigger lead in the office space than Smith Corona, and for them to miss the computer revolution is still astounding, right? And Sears had the entire lead. It was like almost impossible to lose, but they still managed to do it. Yeah.
And who was it? Was it Phil Kotler who said, the railroads lost because they thought of themselves as railroads and not moving goods from
transportation companies.
Yeah. And I think that your digital savvy issue is important. We did some research on the digital savviness of boards in 2019. This was where we used machine learning to we coded all of the bios of all 40,000 directors in the United States of publicly traded companies. And what we found, and it wasn't an overly strict definition of digital savviness. I mean, you had to have certain kinds of experience, but only, and then we said that you had to have 3 people on a board who were digitally savvy to have a digitally savvy board, and the digital savvy boards their companies completely outperformed the non-digitally savvy boards, but only about 24% of boards were digitally savvy. And we're replicating that work now. But what we found is the digital savviness has gone up of the boards using the same criteria to 67%. But we think that that's not enough. We think that it's really got to be a very technically digital technology savvy. And when we do that, only about 16% of boards are digitally savvy. So stay tuned. That research will come out soon.
Yeah, I remember sitting with the CEO of the Philadelphia Inquirer, the people who own the Inquirer and the Daily News in Philadelphia, and telling them that they should do a partnership with Amazon and give Kindles to all their subscribers, get rid of their printing press, and tell people you don't have to worry about the paper getting wet. In fact, you don't even have to leave your bed. It will be zapped right to you first in the morning. And his response after he had bought the company for 560 million was, people still like holding the paper. I think that's long way off. I said, I'm telling you, it's a very short distance. And what ended up happening, they ended up almost zeroing out the entire investment in almost every major paper in the country, except for the Times and the Post, because they were the only ones that really embraced the digital world. But all the others weren't embracing it, and their advertising, everything just went down when they had enormous leads with great brand names. You write 5 words when getting ready for taking advantage of digital transformation: accumulate, build, anticipate, commit, and motivate. Why did you pick these 5?
What we were trying to do was to, and I'm going to flip them and start. We picked these because we were looking at all of the case studies that we did. And we found that every company that had made a real progress had a really crisp, clear motivation about what they wanted to be. So Schneider Electric wanted to be they wanted to provide energy efficiency, and DBS Bank wanted to live more, bank less. And it seemed to us that you had to come up with a purpose that was motivating not just to your own people, but to your customers as well, that made them willing to go along the journey with you. And then in part of motivating, you then turned that into the common language. And then you had to commit to a pathway. What are or pathways if you have multiple business units. And then you had to anticipate these 4 major organizational changes that we saw happening in every company around, allocating decision rights, creating new ways of working, developing a platform mindset, and then doing organizational surgery. And then you start to build your capabilities along the way. And finally, if you don't get to accumulate, which is accumulating value, are you creating and accumulating value, then your transformation has been for naught. So we sort of saw this as a synthesis of kind of the steps that you needed to do to have a successful transformation.
In the book, you mentioned that using digital for operational efficiency and customer experience is probably the best starting point. Is that because it's easier to sell boards in finance departments, or is it because that's where the greatest bang for the buck initially is?
So we started with those 2 because in the discussions with the companies that we were doing case studies on, when we would ask them, what are you trying to accomplish? They would talk about both operational efficiency and customer experience. And I would say that I think one of the big things at Scissor was actually seeing that you had to do both of those at the same time. And so I would say you would do operational efficiency if you were starting to look at productivity, if you were looking at efficiency, customer experience. I would expect that to be reflected in some in more revenue growth and a increase in net promoter score. And so I think what you're going to sell to your board and your finance is what's the biggest issue that you have that you must address. So in certain instances, companies have like big competitors coming in and they have to deal with their customer experience. Or you have some time and you can really start to build out that efficiency, because those that's a very profitable way of going toward efficiency. But if you've got competitive threats, you have to address your customer experience. So it all depends on what is your current problem and opportunity that you have, I think. So I wouldn't say that it's going to be one or the other. You have to look and see where you stand and what your competitive landscape is.
Are older companies at a disadvantage because they might require a bigger, greater investment to tie all the old systems together to leverage all the information stored in those systems and getting them to function with the rest of the organization?
Oh, yeah. Well, they have legacy. They're dealing with legacy. The joke is that you can do organizational archaeology just by looking at the systems, and you can see what was important at a specific time by seeing what kind of system was put into place. And so, yes, bigger, older organizations are at a disadvantage. However, things have come along that have made life easier for some of these bigger companies. So there are platform as a service, there are microservices, there are API layers, things like that large companies can do. And think about what large companies have as assets also. They have typically good brand. They often have money in the bank. They have a base of customers that knows what they can do. So while they have legacy, they also have some of these other assets that I think that they can rely on as they look at the new technologies that help them integrate and get rid of the legacy systems.
You write that the goal of Future Ready is to meet customer needs rather than push products. Wouldn't driving new revenue be the major reason for making a significant digital investment?
It's one, and it's as good a reason as any if you think that new revenue, if that you have that opportunity. I also think that you should not underestimate the operational efficiencies and the integration and consolidation of your data. So if you're meeting your customer needs rather than pushing the products, there's opportunity there for driving new revenue. And that is absolutely one motivation for a digital transformation. But the operational efficiencies and how you can see that in profitability and the opportunities for reuse are really significant. And what you can do when you consolidate your data is something that just driving new revenue isn't going to get you. So some of the operational efficiency issues, the reuse, finding the one best way of doing something, consolidating data, actually set the stage for new and different kinds of customer experiences that you wouldn't be able to do. We talk about operational value and customer value and ecosystem value, and customer value is where you get the biggest bang for your buck, and then ecosystem value is that, and then you have operational value. But you actually can't build customer value and ecosystem value without having a good operational backbone. So there are reasons to spend money on your operational backbone.
How can digitalization improve new product innovation?
This is, I think, where things get really interesting in that, so there's product innovation where you have physical products, and there are ways that you can start to change your products. My colleague Barb Wixom does research on data monetization. So you can think about physical products that throw off data that you can then create a service for. So for instance, IoT, when you have sensors, you're collecting that data, and then you start to think, well, we could do a predictive maintenance service that you wouldn't be able to do if you didn't have digital. So that's some physical combined with the digital. The other area where I see a lot of opportunity for innovation has to do with services, and where companies have things like say Google and its Map API, and you could have Okta and its Identity API, and you can start to put those together to create an integrated solution that might fulfill a customer need that you wouldn't have thought of before. I mean, one of the companies that we have in the book is domain.com.au, and they are actually a spinoff from an old media company. I remember you talking about Sears, is that Fairfax Media in Australia had a huge base of traditional media. They had classified ads, and they knew that that was going to go away. They could just look at other markets. And so they cannibalized themselves, and they set up a skunk works, and they decided that they might as well do it themselves. And they this new unit built a digital platform that re-envisioned what it meant to do property, look for property. And you could dream on that. You could search on it for a property. You could bank, you could get a mortgage on it, you could settle on it, and then you could get services. And you couldn't do that if you didn't have digital enabling, the listings and the bankers and the lawyers and the realtors and the contractors all on one platform. And so those kind of integrated solutions, I think, are really interesting and something that digital allows that you couldn't do otherwise.
In the book, you recommend companies pick a pathway for digitalization. You said there are 4 options, and you started talking about this earlier in the interview. Please tell us what those options are and which one may be the most important. Like, maybe you can't do all of them, but you can do one of them to start with. What are they?
Okay, so I'm going to tell you 4 pathways, and then the argument that I'm going to make is that within a business unit, you should choose one pathway and really try to be as disciplined as you can and stick to it. So the 4 pathways, if you think about the 2 dimensions that I talked about, operational efficiency and customer experience, the first pathway is by industrializing. It's really working on your back-end systems, figuring out the one best way to do something, creating, looking at what your core competitive advantages are and figuring out if you can API enable them so that you can make them into services. It's consolidating data. The issue with that pathway is that early on, it's a very difficult pathway. You're only looking internally. Often your business unit heads you're not doing anything for the customer. And so with that pathway, one thing that you may want to do is think about allocating a certain amount of your transformation budget to your business unit heads to do customer experience types of actions, with the proviso that they are able to be integrated into your platform. You do hit a point in that one. It's kind of like a hockey stick where you have a great back end, and then you can really start to see synergies between operational efficiency and customer experience. The second pathway really focuses on customer experience first, and often what you'll see is a company, there are a couple of things that they could do to start. One is they could create a mobile type of platform that they can add. Another is they could put a wrapper around all of their silos, and they could make it look like their experience is integrated. This is an opportunity to test and learn, to find out what your customers like. The real challenge on this one is you need a traffic cop, someone who is monitoring cost to serve. And you need someone to say, okay, we've done enough now to start, and now we need to re-platform, we need to integrate in. This is the pathway that Cemex took, and They started with a minimum viable product, they got a lot of traction, and then they integrated. The third pathway is around is it looks like stair steps, and it has to do with can you scope your project so that you have, say, 6 to 8, 9-month projects around operational efficiency and customer experience, and can you alternate them so that you do a little bit of operational experience and then you focus on your customer experience, and then you focus again, you maybe integrate that into the platform and do some more on operational efficiency and kind of go upwards toward future ready. The issues with that pathway, it looks like it's a risk-free because you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. However, you need good governance. You need to have a great roadmap so that your people know where you're going. And you need to figure out how to synchronize your learnings from, say, one operational efficiency step to the next operational efficiency step. And then the fourth pathway is you either have a great idea or you throw your hands up and you say, I cannot get there from here. And you start a new business unit that is future ready. You know how we talked about, they don't have the legacy. They start in the cloud. They start with new ways of working, start with new technologies. And what you have to do there is figure out, what are you going to do if you are successful? And what is your goal? Are you trying to build a new business unit? Are you trying to learn so that you can bring your other business, the mothership, as we call it, up to the same level? Or are you going to spin it off because you don't have the capability to really run it? And so those are the 4 pathways. You choose them based on the level of threat that you have, how engaged are your customers, what is your what is your kind of cultural fit. Like a lot of manufacturing companies like a pathway 1. It feels comfortable. They know about efficiency. They know about productivity. A lot of retail under a fair amount of threat, and they have to engage those customers. A pathway 2 fits very well for them. So you have to look at your own issues and opportunities. And you can have more than one pathway, but you must coordinate them. You want to figure out what's global and really ensure that you're getting those global efficiencies.
I hate bots and many non-human interactions. Is this going to get better where we don't feel like throwing the computer and cursing out the bot? Because I do that quite often. Cursing out the bot, not throwing the computer.
I was going to say, you and I together. I don't know. I keep waiting for it to be better. And maybe I hear that generative AI may help. Haven't seen it yet, and I don't know. It should get better. I mean, right now it's pretty, you have all of these these answers kind of programmed in, and that's all that you get. And it's very frustrating. I think that this is what I worry. That was one of my first worries when I heard about generative AI. It's like, oh my God, I'm going to have more bots.
Yeah.
Does the world need another one? Now, I'm probably being too harsh, but I'm hoping not. Or they need to be made very much better so that it's like you're talking to someone. I'm not sure. I fear we're going to get more. I don't think
it's good customer service. I mean,
I hate it.
And I think it's just a cost savings for the company. I mean, even huge companies like Microsoft that have all the money in the world used to be able to actually talk to somebody. Now they want you to go and use these bots, and you just become so frustrated that you actually go to an organization that has humans talking to you, like GoDaddy. You can reach somebody 24/7 on them. And the minute they start using these bots, I'll leave them because it's that frustrating.
I know. I don't know how to ask the questions to have a good customer experience. It's quite frustrating. And I don't know if people, it could be that they don't care, that it's not worth their while. And I don't know how, if it can be made better. I obviously don't know how to ask the question correctly because I end up being frustrated and hitting operator, operator, operator. And
yeah, that's exactly what I do. And maybe it's an age thing, I don't know, but it drives me nuts. Is digitalization different in usage depending on the industry, corporate culture, and or country?
okay, industry, I can certainly say. So if you are going to look at who's further ahead, you're certainly not going to be surprised to see that, information technology and technology companies are further along in there. And you have companies within industries that are going to be far ahead, but certain industries are going to be less transformed than others. I think there's a piece in the book that shows, heavy industry less transformed than I think other industries, in part because of what their product is, and the lack of there's real no definition about who the end customer is, and so it's quite difficult to actually have a real customer experience. They are very much more focused on operational efficiency. I mean, I think if you were to see a digital transformation of a heavy industry type of company, and it was like a stair step 3, it would be really long, treads of operational efficiency, little tiny risers of customer experience. So yes, there are differences. I have seen some research that suggests that some of Asia Pac is more advanced in the use of digital technologies, but in part that's because they don't have the companies with the legacy systems. Now, that doesn't, so I haven't seen any success. I haven't seen financial performance also being reflected. I've just seen the fact that some of the countries have higher levels of digitalization because they started out with very low, their technology, their companies there's just not as many old companies. And so they were able to start right away. I think age might be a better proxy than, I think industry and age is probably going to be better proxy than country.
Okay. What are the hot job areas for the next 5 years that will guarantee good paying employment in the digital world?
So my colleague Nick Vandermeulen is in the process of he's almost finished with his project this year on talent. And you can look at certainly, I think the places that companies say that they are not very well, that they don't have the skills, which would suggest that that might be a place where you could get, where there are going to be real opportunities. I think that those are around artificial intelligence. So what your stats skills, some programming and algorithms that you might need to know. I think short-term prompt engineering might be good. I'm not sure that that's going to be a long-term. There are issues around strategy and business model. So knowing what technology can do for your company that I think are going to be really important. Nick has got really interesting research showing that about companies are estimating that they need to really upskill at least 38% of their employees because their skills are just not they're just not the right fit for what digital is requiring, how companies are transforming themselves and what is needed to have a successful company. So I think I think that if you're looking at straightforward things that generative AI might be able to do and augment, those might be ones that you would not spend as much time in. But some of the more creative ones, I think, especially around programming, data sciences, and around strategies around how you use technology to make a company operate differently.
The chairman of Schneider Electric says every executive needs to take digital transformation personally. What type of technological knowledge, especially in the digital area, could future leaders, which you point out outperform less knowledgeable leaders by 48% on a revenue growth and valuation, need to possess to run a business dominated and driven by technology?
So I don't think they need to know how to do it. So I don't think that we need to have your CEOs and your CMOs programming, but I think that they need to have an idea of what technology can do for the company, and they need to know it at enterprise scale. So it's not just knowing, hey, I'm really good with my phone. That's not being digitally savvy. You really need to know what are the kinds of technologies that that companies are going to need, that's going to make a huge difference. And then the other thing that they need to do is they need to know when to experiment, when to commit, and when to scale. So I think that there's this expertise and knowledge based on being part of innovation in large projects in the past. And then the other piece is around risk, and they need to be able to evaluate project risk versus business model risk. And a lot of times I think, and this is probably what happened with Sears, is they looked at business model risk and saw that as so huge. So and the project risk for the small stuff was really small. I think that leaders need to educate themselves, but I don't think they need to do it. So they probably need to make sure that they have, that they participate in some kind of activity, perhaps by talking to startups to see how startups are doing their work. So, operating in the startup networks or participating in evaluating startups. I think that there are ways of using your own company knowledge to help you figure out, where you need to be savvy. Case studies, even so you can bring in an external case study, or you can look at something, maybe talk to your CIO and say, what did we do well, and bring that up as a discussion. Digital tourism used to be big. With COVID, that has actually kind of changed quite a bit. And I also think that you want to do some type of education to know what data and digital can do for your company. I know some board directors have, taken an online course in data so that they know the terms, they know how people are thinking about it. And so companies like DBS, because they were focused on live more, bank less, customer journeys became very important. And their CEO said that every executive had to participate in mapping a customer journey. So there are things that you can do to build up your digital savviness so that you are taking it seriously. And I will say that, Schneider Electric put digital into every executive's review. So that'll get you to start thinking about where it's important and how you use it.
And buying your book.
Yes, they could buy our book too.
Yeah, for sure. You write about leading with strong purpose, but I think every successful business people are motivated by purpose. So where does digital fit into the purpose behind just being a tool? And can you give examples?
So when we were thinking about purpose, it was clear that every company felt that they had a purpose, but the ones that seemed most motivating were not just motivating to the executives themselves and to the people inside the company, but were also exciting for their customers. And so I think it makes you think about what it is that you're doing that also your customers can buy into. So, and I think that digital fits into the purpose because companies that are using digital well are expanding what they can do, and they're interacting with their customers in different ways. And so the three purposes I think I've seen right away that we've seen customers also find really engaging are Schneider Electric's purpose for providing energy efficiency for all buildings. I mean, they call it Life is On. DBS Bank, live more bank less. And then, you could look at Cochlear, which builds, they make hearing aids, and
Yep.
they
Yep.
have a purpose around getting the whole world to hear you. Well, you can't do all of that without digital. So I think I agree with you that strong purpose is necessary, but I think where it really makes a difference is that you've used digital to kind of hook in the customer too, and the customer believes your purpose also.
In the book, you said that companies with clear multiple pathways have a 59% completion rate and that those don't have 30%. Why isn't the top number higher, and what are the companies that have such a low number doing wrong?
The top number is not higher. Just, I think.
Why aren't they higher?
I know. One is that's an average, and so that's just a basis of stats. What we're worried about right now is in the latest survey is that we've seen that it looks like transformations are stalling. But still, companies with multiple transformations that are very coordinated are higher in their progress, but they're not as high as you would think that they would be. You would think that there might be some synergies, and there doesn't seem to be synergies. But I think part of that is it's just hard. And I think that what companies are facing now are the real difficult issues. They're going to have to reorganize. They're going to have to, do the hard work of figuring out, which are the product lines you keep. Are you spending money on the right things? I'm not sure why they aren't higher, but typically I look at it from the opposite lens and say, if you are not coordinated and you're not disciplined, you are stalled. And they're still stalled in 2022.
He's talked about how companies with a platform mindset reuse their platforms to take, as you write, their crown jewels and turn it into other digital services and products, which I guess is what Amazon has done. And can you give some examples?
I will try. Let's see. So when I think about developing a platform mindset, it involves several things. One is you really are focused on how do you integrate what needs to be integrated so that you are able to reuse, say, processes or data or technology across the platform. So what happens when you are integrating is you've got things that are easily available and findable that you can reuse again and again and again. And that's very good for profitability. That's good for time to market. And it helps you free up money for innovation. The second thing that they do is they are looking at the platform and figuring out, what can we make into an API? What kind of product or service or component that we have? Say, for instance, onboarding a customer. And can we create a component out of that, make that service, enable that with an API, and then reuse that over and over again? So I think that developing the platform mindset is really this notion of integrating your data, consolidating it so that you can actually use the data and leverage it. And then on top of that, service enabling so that you can plug and play into not only your platform, but into other companies' platforms as well. And so when you start to think about it, I think Amazon is right. I think that any bank that has, like I said, onboarded a customer and has decided that they don't need 17 ways to do it is correct. I think that, Okta creating an identity service, that's their crown jewel, gets used over and over and over again, both internally and externally. PayPal would be that kind of plug and play type of service. So those are the kinds of ways that we're seeing a platform mindset really get leveraged.
Stephanie, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. And I loved your book. I think all boards and leaders of companies need to read this book so they can get up to speed so they don't become the next Sears.
That's right. Thank you so much. I think that that's what we're trying to do our research on. How do we help large companies succeed in the digital economy?
Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Have a great weekend, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.